When local newspaper the Glen Innes Examiner came out on the 19th of September 2024, it marked the end of an almost 150-year tradition in the New South Wales North Tablelands town. The first edition of the Glen Innes Examiner came out in October 1874. That makes the Examiner one of what the Media Alliance says is more than 200 regional and community newspapers that have ceased printing over the last decade or so. But now there's a new paper in town in Glen Innes. The Glen Innes News literally made news in Glen Innes in January when the first print edition of the not-for-profit volunteer-run newspaper came out. And President of the Glen Innes News, David Lewis, says it was breaking even within a couple of weeks. As a failed newspaper publisher myself, I'm very keen to find out how the Glen Innes News did it. So we welcome now President of the Glen Innes News, David Lewis. Thanks for joining us on Sunday Extra, David.
Julian, good morning.
Could you tell us how the Glen Innes News became a thing, David?
Well, as you said, what we had as a local newspaper, the Glen Innes Examiner, had been, I suppose, as far as local content goes, in decline for a few years. It didn't have a local journalist at all since just before the COVID pandemic. And then they announced fairly quickly, I think they only announced in the beginning of September, that they were going to stop the print edition, and that happened that same month. So having a background in community media, I'd raised the idea of maybe coming up with something some fairly vague ideas with a couple of mates around town, and there was a bit of interest in it, but nothing ever eventuated. And then when the Examiner announced that they were going to stop their print edition, I jumped on the phone to these same people and said, well, hey guys, if we're going to do it, now's the time to strike. We're a community that can't be left with no local coverage. And ever since then, none of us slept a full night.
So tell us the model, David. How does the Glen Innes News work?
Okay, well, we have our website, which is updated daily with news stories as they come in. And we also have a fortnightly print edition, which is distributed through a whole bunch of outlets. I think we're up to just about 50 now, your local cafes, news agencies and things like that. And that's totally free. The model behind that is that the advertisers or the advertising revenue pays for the printing, and then anything above that we gratefully accept and receive donations from individuals and some local service clubs especially, and those are the funds that we use to try new things or look at possible expansion of what we do. For example, we've recently increased our page count from 16 to 20 now. In the scheme of a national newspaper, that's probably small fish, but for us it's a significant upgrade, and it's that kind of income that funds our ability to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of sweat equity from the volunteers, clearly.
Absolutely. Very much a labour of love.
Is the advertising revenue covering costs, as seemed to be the case, at least in the first couple of weeks? And are the advertisers the same people who were advertising in the Glen Innes Examiner?
Look, some of them, to be fair to the Examiner, there wasn't a huge number of their advertisers to target. Possibly one of the reasons they decided to stop. Our first edition was essentially funded by donations from the local Lions Club and a few others like that, who had put their faith in us to do what we thought we were able to do. From then, absolutely, we've been clearing enough through advertising revenue alone to keep the lights on and keep the printer running.
Can you give us a taste of some of the stories that the Glen Innes News has covered in its relatively brief existence so far, David?
Yeah, sure. Look, we have a couple of people as part of the team here who've worked in journalism, but most of us haven't. So we're just making it up as we go. We're learning as we go. Look, anything from sort of local crime stories to your typical, what's the council up to, and what seems to be most popular with the majority of our readers is just anything to do with people, local stories. Actually, one of the stories that received certainly the biggest number of hits on our website and still sits at the top 4 months later was a story about a school reunion. Now, that's not going to make the front page of The Australian or the front page of the website of The Guardian, but to the local people here, that was something significant, and so that's what we try to focus on.
We're speaking with the president of the Glen Innes News, David Lewis, on Sunday Extra this morning. David, what's the reception been from readers? And I know readership figures are notoriously ropey in the newspaper industry, but what sort of circulation would you say you've got?
Oh, well, in a population, let's say the LGA here has about 10,000 residents, give or take. Using industry standards, we'll say that we've got about 14 million readers. But beyond that, hard numbers are that we're printing roughly 1,700 to 1,800 copies per fortnight. And the last time I looked this morning, the website's getting 5,000 unique visitors each month. So we'd say for every edition, which is fortnightly, we've got between 6,000 and 7,000 readers.
Pretty solid place to be starting from, though. What's the reaction been in the community to the Glen Innes news, in your estimation, David?
We've had incredibly positive feedback, which is very encouraging, especially as a volunteer team. It's all well and good to believe in what we're doing, but to have the encouragement from the people who are ultimately the end consumer of all that work is really encouraging. Actually got to a point in my own mind where we were getting almost too much positive feedback and we weren't getting any negative feedback, and that made me start to get a bit paranoid, and I'm thinking, well, what aren't they telling us? And then when someone finally said, I didn't like that story that you did, I was relieved. Thank God.
One of the things you alluded to is the importance of covering local news and local politics in particular. And it sounds like the Examiner had eased off on that front. But the Guardian also noted in its profile of the paper that one of the people on the committee for the Glen Innes news is now on council. How do you deal with that situation?
Mate, I don't know if you've ever lived in a small town, but these sorts of, and look, it is a potential conflict of interest. There's no denying that. These sorts of crossovers happen all the time. Everyone who's involved in that relationship, the council, senior staff of council, all of our people, we're, as a non-profit, we're incorporated association, we're governed by a committee. Everything's known and declared. If something untoward was going on, there would be no way to hide it anyway. Not that we would want to do that. So look, we manage conflict of interest as it comes up, but so far it hasn't. And actually, I think it's a good thing that we've got the scrutiny of the community to make sure that nothing ever does.
David, you mentioned earlier that you've worked in community media across 3 decades. Could you tell us about how you started in the field and what sort of things you've done between that and the Glen Innes news?
Mate, I've generally been making a nuisance of myself around community radio stations for as long as I can remember. I don't know why. Maybe it's presenters like you, Julian, who piqued my interest. But as a child, I was just always fascinated with radio. And when I really think about it, I grew up in a household where the radio was on all the time. Just as background noise, and it was a commercial radio station in Brisbane. I guess I can name them because I don't exist anymore. I grew up with 4KQ, and I guess it fascinated me that someone talking on the radio who I knew was a long, long way away in a building that I'd never seen was in my home at the same time. When I turned 13, I decided, well, best we do something about this. How do we start? And I called a local, and when I say local, I mean very local. I think they had a broadcast range of 3, on a good day, maybe 4 meters, and called them in the vain hope that they might let me come in and scrub the floors so I could observe what's going on. And when I made that offer, the gentleman who answered the phone said, "What time do you finish school today? Come in afterwards and start our drive program."
Right.
My training in the studio was that button there turns the microphone on. Don't say the F word. See you in an hour. And it's been, roughly equivalent since then.
One of the big challenges for any masthead is managing the transition from print to digital. What's your sense of how that's going to play out for the Glen Innes news?
Well, we actually started digitally first, and that was purely by virtue of circumstances. We had always intended to print. When the idea first came up, we held a public meeting, first of all, to see if anyone even wanted a newspaper. We were fairly convinced it was an important idea, but we thought we should ask a few people before we did it. The answer was resoundingly, yes, we need media, and yes, we want it in print. Particularly this local area here, the Glen Innes LGA, if you look at the demographics, our population here, it does skew quite a bit older than the state average. So I dare say that plays a part in the popularity of the print edition. Look, at the end of the day, whatever it's in demand, it's something that we've committed to doing. In our circumstances, and I understand this isn't the same circumstance across the industry or the sector, is the print edition is our primary source of income. Advertising in the print edition generates a lot more income for us than online advertising. But certainly, whatever that's the case, whatever we can pay for it with what we can generate with our activities, but we'll keep doing it.
Well, you've certainly got your hands full with the Glen Innes news. I read, David, that you moved into the region to open a family business. How's your other business going, and how's your family going now that you've got all these journalistic responsibilities?
I haven't seen them in a while. I'm vaguely aware that there's other people around who I recognise, sort of. No, actually, the family business was primarily a project of my mother's that I helped with. And Mum's since retired, so that's not an issue. There's no distractions there. But yeah, I would look at, as with any other role where you act as a volunteer, you've got to juggle responsibilities. I'm quite a fan of eating. And unfortunately, that doesn't come free. So, and same with all of our volunteers. It's just a matter of juggling that time and juggling responsibility. I guess where we're in a really strong position is that we do have an incredible team of volunteers. I think at last count, a solid core team of 15 people. And as long as we're sharing the responsibilities around and delegating where we need to, it all seems to be working quite well.
Well, newspaper publishing in this country is a long history of short histories, but it sounds like the Glen Innes News is off to a great start, and that's great to hear. Thanks so much for speaking with us about it on Sunday Extra today, David.
No, Mac, Julian, thanks for your time.
That's David Lewis, president of the Glen Innes News. And the next print edition of the Glen Innes News is out on Thursday, the 22nd of May.
Find more great ABC RN stories that take you beyond the headlines on the ABC Listen app.